Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're dropping right into a profound and honestly pretty chilling historical reality based on our source material. America is widely known as the land of freedom, right? A nation built on liberty, independence, and opportunity. But beneath the fireworks and the celebrations, there's a painful truth about our history that the research argues a lot of us were never fully taught. It's a story about power, economics, trauma, and ultimately, deeply delayed justice. Imagine being told, you are finally free. I want you to really put yourself in that headspace for a second. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your entire life, your basic human autonomy, had been stolen from you by a massive wall of silence. Imagine the jarring, just absolute emotional shock of discovering that your freedom wasn't some new development. It had actually been kept a secret from you for years. 2.5. That is the exact number of years stolen by that silence. Not a day, not a month, 2.5 years after slavery had already legally ended in the United States. And that terrifying reality explored in the text forces us to ask a tough question. If freedom could be delayed back then, what forms of freedom are still being delayed today? Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the delay of freedom, when law doesn't equal reality. So let's look at the timeline. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation. Millions of enslaved African Americans are legally declared free. But there's a massive gap. It wasn't until June 19th, 1865, that Union General Gordon Granger arrived down in Galveston, Texas, with federal troops to actually deliver the news to roughly 250,000 enslaved Black Americans. He announced General Order No. 3, declaring all slaves are free. Just think about the overwhelming emotional weight of that single sentence. Picture the families crying, people literally collapsing to their knees in tears of joy as they experienced freedom for the very first time. But at the exact same time, try to fathom the intense rage, the devastating realization that this freedom had been intentionally withheld from them. Now, you might be wondering, how did this hidden reality even happen? Well, enslavers intentionally hid the news. Because communication was incredibly slow and federal law enforcement was weak while the Civil War raged on, plantation owners were able to exploit this gap. They just kept forcing Black Americans to work without pay, without rights, and without humanity, simply to maintain their horrific yet highly profitable status quo. Which brings us to Section 2, the economics of humanity, human beings as assets. The text focuses heavily on dehumanization. It's this psychological process of treating human beings not as people, but as financial property and assets to be exploited. By the mid-1800s, cotton was one of America's most valuable exports, and this psychological dehumanization fundamentally altered the DNA of American society. People were literally reduced to property on a ledger. And the sheer scale of the data here is staggering. Back in the 1860 U.S. economy, historians estimate that the economic value of enslaved people actually exceeded the combined value of America's railroads and factories. Let that sink in. Enslaved human beings generated more wealth than the nation's major industries combined. That massive economic incentive is exactly why freedom was delayed. But here's the thing. These oppressive systems, they didn't simply vanish in 1865. They evolved. The methods mutated into brand new forms of control over power, labor, and wealth. We saw the rise of Black codes, Jim Crow laws, segregation, redlining, mass incarceration, and systemic economic exclusion. The chains definitely looked different, but the struggle for true freedom absolutely continued. And a source material uses Federal Reserve data to show that the evidence of that historical trauma is still highly visible today. The median wealth of white American families remains significantly higher than that of Black families. The research argues this proves that unresolved history creates modern inequality, pointing out that wealth dictates where families live, what schools children attend, and what future opportunities they get. So let's move to Section 3, Modern Echoes of Inequality, the Conditional Nature of Freedom. The explainer highlights how, for so many Americans right now, freedom feels incredibly conditional. I mean, you are free, but one medical emergency can completely bankrupt you. It's really hard to feel truly liberated when your basic health and survival are constantly threatened by catastrophic costs. The source draws another pretty stark parallel, arguing that you are free, but housing prices push families into constant anxiety. The fundamental human need for shelter has somehow become this profound source of stress and insecurity for everyday people. And finally, it points out that millions work multiple jobs and still cannot afford stability. The research makes the case that debt and low wages leave millions feeling trapped today, despite living in one of the absolute richest nations in human history.
The data illustrates a really widespread crisis outlined by the authors. On one side, you have a young Black American student facing underfunded schools, policing fears, and generational financial struggle. On the other, a working-class white family in rural America dealing with lost factory jobs, wage stagnation, and community addiction. Entirely different histories, different demographics. Yet the source observes that both share a really deep feeling that the system no longer protects ordinary people, positing that Juneteenth actually speaks to anyone who has ever felt unheard, exploited, or trapped.
That brings us to Section 4, The Cost of Silence, What America Risks Losing. The source outlines how unhealed historical trauma and ignored inequality actively fuel our modern scars. We're witnessing a massive distrust in institutions right now. We see intense political polarization and nonstop social media outrage. Communities are fragmented, and there are rising epidemics of loneliness and depression. A society simply cannot fully heal if it refuses to honestly confront its past. This leads to an incredibly urgent warning from the text. Forgotten suffering often repeats itself in new forms. History shows us time and time again that societies become incredibly unstable when large groups of people feel invisible and unheard. Freedom without opportunity creates frustration, and freedom without truth creates division. So, how do we fix it? Section 5, Rebuilding America's Soul, the Blueprint for the Future. The text lays out 4 highly actionable steps for a unified future. First up, teaching history honestly, not to create guilt, but for actual understanding. Second, investing in communities. Accessible healthcare and affordable housing matter, because freedom means very little if basic survival is impossible. Third, rebuilding human connection, creating spaces where neighbors actually listen to one another again. And fourth, encouraging economic fairness, so working people don't have to live in constant fear. The source leaves us with this deeply hopeful thought. Freedom is not merely the absence of chains. It is the presence of dignity, opportunity, truth, and humanity. Juneteenth shows us the extraordinary resilience of communities that survived centuries of unimaginable suffering to build culture, flourish, and dream. It's a powerful reminder that freedom is never a finished achievement. It's a continuous responsibility for every single generation. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to turn the focus back to you. What does freedom mean to you in modern America? Have we truly learned the lessons of Juneteenth? I highly encourage you to reflect on this, share this powerful narrative with others, and keep this vital conversation going, because understanding our history is really the only way to protect our future. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.